In this presentation titled The Identity of the Prophet, we will look at more evidence of the travels of Christ and visitations across the Pacific Ocean and the American continents, identifying the travels of Christ upon the Pacific. This is a story from the book He Walked the Americas by L. Taylor Hansen. Question: who was the Lord Water, or otherwise known as the Plumed Serpent? The identity of the prophet. The identity of the Plumed Serpent, or the Lord of Wind and Water, was an argument which raged with considerable heat at the time of the conquest. The Catholic Church, confronted with the facts which seemed to point to an early Christian, suggested that he may have been St. Thomas. In fact, in Mexico he was often called St. Quetzalcoatl. Las Casas and Kingsborough were not inclined to accept this conclusion. They pointed out that such words as sin, Trinity, virgin birth, winged beings or angels, the use of the Ten Commandments, and the ceremonial baptism and marriage vows, whose similarity ends across both American continents, suggest an origin for which Lord Kingsborough was inclined to look higher than St. Thomas, while the monk remained discreetly silent. It is the opinion of this present writer that Quetzalcoatl must have been an Iceni. Since the beginning, and since the opening of the Dead Sea Scrolls, we have come to know a good deal about this religious order of which Jesus was supposed to have been a member. We know now that they favored a white toga-like garment, wore no covering on their heads, and always spoke of God as, quote, my Father. Strangely enough, the Amerind, or American Indian, seems to recognize this word. I have been corrected several times in its pronunciation. Finally, a Choctaw informed me that this was the name for the wind god. Although the name may differ from tribe to tribe, he said it could be recognized by the long E sound, repeated twice, with a hissing in between. Therefore, this word should be Iceni. A few days later, I brought him a temple painting of Osiris from ancient Egypt and asked him if he could recognize the deity in question. Without any hesitation, he named Osiris as the wind god, and then, as an added surprise, he pointed to Set and said, that is the death god. When I argued that in this case the name was Osiris, he shook his head. These people are not dealing accurately with you. The ceremonial name should be Iciris. Yet in Mexico, the prophet was known as Quetzal or Quetzal. That is the name of a bird which stood for the wind or air. Our name for him was Icicotl. The TL sound is a title of a great veneration. Thus does one learn the most amazing facts from the Amerind, but the suggestion of an ancient knowledge is even greater. That Quetzal made his amazing travels during the first century would be far harder to disclaim today than it was during the lifetime of Alex Hrdlicka, the anthropologist who devoted his life to proving that the Amerind is a recent invader from the Orient. He so influenced the present writer that when a student at the University of California Southern Branch, that it was some time before I could take this legend seriously. Alas for Hrdlicka and his ideas, the discovery of flints in Amerind manufacture and fossilized bones of bison, undoubtedly Pleistocene or Ice Age time, was followed by the newest tool of science. I apologize for the mispronunciation. Carbon dating. Then all these civilizations which Hrdlicka had pronounced very recently began to recede backward in time. Immediately the legend, which had been passed over, again sprang to life. I could no longer regard the figure of Quetzal as a simple dawn god who was opposed to the god of darkness, that Aztec divinity, Tezcatlipoca. Especially was this true after I had met Sedilio. That sage was not unacquainted with the ideas of Hrdlicka, whom he regarded with amused indifference. Although grateful for the recitation of Sedilio's ancient chants, which, lacking sons and headed for battle, he might have taken to the grave, yet I was frankly skeptical of the antiquity of the Chihuahua Valley. Not until I questioned pilots above the ancient drainage systems and had flown over it myself did I suddenly realize the authenticity of this legacy. That Quetzalcoatl was the final great leader of the sacrificers as they marched to power now seems to me very probable. Perhaps he followed the prophet in time, but he must have had a very powerful personality to overcome the veneration of the people for the pale god. By rereading old college notes taken so carelessly at the time, which now have taken on new meaning, reading old books, now lost, but which are quoted by other old books, seeking out these stories told to the explorers by the tribes who then spoke freely, because they were not silenced by later cynical amusement caused by ignorance, and especially by visiting the wild tribes, who, as Delugic, chief medicine man of the Mescalero Apaches once said to me, are, quote, willing to sit down and reason with you, if you can contribute to the council. Has this book grown? But the identity of the prophet, who apparently did live in the 1st century, still remains an elusive mystery. Dr. Buck, late curator of the Bishop Museum of Hawaii, was not surprised that Wako or Wakia was to be traced around the Americas. Numerous plants found in both areas had convinced him of ancient commerce, while his people, who had traveled to all the Pacific points by star navigation, regarded no distance across the Pacific as impossible. Therefore I am again thrown back upon Dr. Buck's description of the fair god as a man who arrived in the company of men who apparently wore clothing Mediterranean in type, in 3 Roman ships, or again, in ships of a Mediterranean type, whose origin was probably the Red Sea. However, Dr. Buck noted that China had similar legends, and also India, which he had collected from natives of those lands then living in Hawaii. There is a Wakayama mountain in Japan, the last word being Japanese for mountain. Therefore, he concluded that the ships which brought and left the fair god had already toured the Orient, undoubtedly in his company. Beyond the fact that he regarded Wako or Wakia as a real person who lived during the century of Jesus, he was unwilling even to hazard a guess as to the identity of the prophet. Perhaps we should leave the question with the Mexican archaeologists who, when tossed this puzzle of antiquity, simply shrugged their shoulders and answered. According to the Dead Sea Scrolls, there was a very saintly man preceding Jesus by about a century. This holy man, an Essene, had no name except the Master, or the Great Teacher. He was crucified but was apparently saved by the Essenes, who were in the crowd surrounding him. Scientists in England have suggested that Polynesian chants allow for an error of time, perhaps a century, plus or minus. Quien sabe? Who knows? Clearly evidence of Christ in all of these cultures. The coincidence is too much to deny. Variations of the cloud serpent design are shown here. Talking about travel across the Pacific, sometimes we want to just kind of let our listeners know there's examples, there's evidence of ships and rafts and watercraft that go back centuries before the Europeans came to the American continents. These people have a history that teach that they were well acquainted with traveling on the Pacific Ocean. Many similarities are shown in the cultures across the Pacific all the way to South America, as you can see in this following map. That arrow to the right pointing at South America, Peru area, a little south of there. And these are some of the suggested routes of travel. You can see this on worldhistory.org. The probability of accidental migration due to drifts. That's just pretending that you're in a raft and you just get out there in the water and you drift and find an island. That probability of accidental migration is negligible according to this article. We're talking about Polynesian navigation, settlement of the Pacific. Please comment in the comment field if you have feedback on this video. Thank you for watching. Please like and subscribe.